Power supplies, power supplies, power supplies. This is Ridgeway Tech. So hi guys, Craig here, back with another video, and this time just a little informal video about power supplies. So basically I just wanted to touch base with you because I've just finished writing a short article for the website, just discussing, for basics, just some of the pros and cons of cheaping out on your power supply basically. Because you go to the computer store and you do see power supplies very cheap that promise that they're 500 watts, 600 watts, but they're just not really up to the task. For starters, they're not going to come with the right connections that you need because the manufacturers know they're not up to the task, so they won't give you the right connections to connect to your power supply, to your graphics card for instance. Hence why graphics cards still to this day tend to ship with these things, and these are just adapters so that you can adapt Molex to a PCI Express 6-pin, which these are fine maybe for a stopgap if you're waiting for your power supply, but you really don't want to be using these things. And here's a for instance. Here's one that I pulled out of a customer's computer, and it's completely burnt the cable up where it's drawing too much power through it. So that's the sort of thing that can happen. Now that could have led to a fire. You see it's all burnt up there, and that's why we shouldn't use these things. Now I had to search around to find a power supply. I found an old power supply. This one's broken, it's been pulled out of a customer's computer. And it was probably fine just for basic use, but you start trying to add graphics cards and stuff to this, as you can see it doesn't come with any PCI Express connectors. It's just not up to the task. Now it does say that it's a 350 watt power supply, so with a 350 watt power supply you wouldn't really expect it to be able to power much in the way of graphics anyhow, but that was all I could find in terms of old power supplies. So that's our junker. So if you get something like that, then you really don't want to know. Now let's have a look at some power supplies. Now I've got a couple here to open, and I've got a couple on here that I'm going to show you. And really, starting with your basics, this is what I'd call your sort of bare minimum entry level power supply. This is an Antec, good brand. You can trust Antec, 450 watts, and it's not the prettiest thing in the world. Hasn't got all sleeved cables. You've got your 24-pin there that's sleeved, but the rest aren't, which is fine, you know, especially if you're not going to be able to see it. You know, you've got plenty of SATA and Molex, and we've got 8-pin, so we can do 8-pin for our motherboard. Again, something that a lot of cheap power supplies will only have a 4-pin. And we do have one 6-pin so that we'd be able to put a low-end graphics card in, something that doesn't use too much power. That would be fine for that. This power supply is completely wired. There's no modularity about it. But it's a nice short power supply by a good brand that you can trust. And I'd recommend Antec power supplies to anyone all day long. I've been using them for years. They've never let me down. So just put this one to one side. Now on the other end of the spectrum, I've got a unit here to show you. This one is an Enermax unit. It's an Enermax Revolution, and what is this one? Is 920 watt. So it's 920 watt. Of course we've got our 80 plus. This one's 80 plus silver. So the 80 plus is something you need to look out for when you're buying your power supply. It just means that it's a minimum of 80% efficiency under load, and it's a standard in which they have to enter their power supply and gets certified. Now if it's a certified 80 plus power supply, you probably can't go wrong with it. Now these power supplies also have things like power correction and stuff. So if you're going to get, say you've got a little bit dodgy power around where you live and you're getting brownouts or blackouts and power surges coming through into your electric, well, a good quality power supply is going to save your components. And if you spent thousands of pounds on your computer components, then this is going to save them. It's going to cut out before the power can spike and go through into your motherboard, into your graphics card. And with a cheap power supply, you can find that you could take out all the components in your computer. And that's something that obviously you really don't want. So taking another look at this, you can see that we've got a certain amount of cables are pre-wired. And on this one, you're looking at your 24 pin, which is your main motherboard power. You've also got 2 PCI Express cables pre-wired in, because if you're buying a power supply that's nearly 1000 watts, they're going to assume that you're plugging at least one graphics card into it. And then we also on this one have 2 8-pin EPS cables to plug into your motherboard. So this is going to be great for some of your dual CPU boards, some of your dual Xeons, that sort of thing, or just some of your high-end motherboards that just require extra power for the CPU. But as you can see, we've also got some connections on the back here. I've got a couple of extra cables here. So if you had another graphics card you wanted to add in, we've got another dual 8-pin PCI Express power, and that just plugs in. So you need to be careful and make sure you're plugging in the right one. So it's labelled there. We've got extra CPU, GPU, CPU, GPU, RAM. So we can go ahead and plug this one in there. It should only go in one way. I've got the studio lights in my eyes, so I can't see what I'm doing. But there we go, that plugs in there. And it's as simple as that. Also, if you want to add extra Molex, you might want to have some old Molex that needs powering, and these can go in over here. We've got HDD, ODD, etc. So we're going to say that's for this one here. And in she pops. And then the same for SATA. And we're going to say, oops, where'd she go? HDD. Of course I got it the wrong way around. Or have I? There we go. Simple as that. And that gives you the ability to leave some of these cables out of the case so that you're going to get better airflow without having a lot of cables in the way, and you're also going to be able to just make it look neat and tidy. And this is a nice looking power supply. It's the sort of power supply that you'd put into a high-end build where looking pretty is just as important as the performance. Now, when you're shopping for your power supply, the things to look out for is obviously don't buy more than what you need. You know, you can find out from your motherboard, your graphics card, and your CPU, you can find out what sort of wattage power supply you're going to be looking for. And I'll just tell you this while I open one of these. I'll get my handy dandy knife. There are some calculators online. There are many, so you can Google to find out which one you like, and also try out multiple ones and get a second opinion. But you can put in all the components that you've got that you want to power, and it will give you a rough estimation as to what power supply you're going to need. So in general, for one graphics card, you're probably going to be wanting around a 500 or 600 watt power supply, and if you're doing SLI or Crossfire or, you know, if you've got a lot of add-in cards, then perhaps you're going to want to bump up to around a 750 to an 850 watt. And if you're doing something crazy, you're going to be looking at 1000 watt plus. Now this unit here, this is a refurbished unit, refurbished from Corsair. So I've never had a problem buying refurbished units. That, as far as I'm concerned, they are as good as new, if not better, because they've actually gone back to the manufacturer and they've been tested on an individual basis. Now, if you buy them off the shelf, now you don't know whether that particular one's been tested, because they don't test every single one before it leaves the factory, believe it or not. They only test, you know, one every now and again to make sure they're okay. It depends on who you're buying from. I couldn't say for every manufacturer, but I've never had a problem buying refurbished, and they still give you the guarantee and you save a few bucks. Now this unit, you've just seen me pull a few extra cables out. Comes with some screws to put in your case if you didn't already have them, and you do without the fancy box with the nice print on it, and you get a brown box instead, but you're going to be chucking the box away, so who cares what it comes in. Now again, with that last Enermax power supply I showed you, this is a semi-modular unit. We've got our basic cables connected, which is going to be our 24 pin and our 8 pin motherboard connectors, because they're the bare minimum you need to run your system. The only other time you would need a power supply without those would be if you were running dual power supplies and you just needed the other power supply to power more graphics or extra HDDs, for instance. But for the most part, you're going to definitely need your 24 pin and your 8 pin. Now that's your bare minimum you're going to need. Now, the extra cables that come with this particular unit, which is a Corsair CX600M, M standing for modular, is an extra PCI Express. Sorry, it's 2 PCI Express on there. We have Molex. That's for usually your old school peripherals. Maybe you've got a DVD drive that still uses it or something. This one's another PCI, sorry, no, this one's SATA. So don't get confused, because these have all got PCI Express connectors that connect it to the power supply. Now they all are labelled, as you can see. There's labels on them. I mean, so you can see where it goes. That should correspond to the back of it. If not, follow your manual. So that's a semi-modular unit. Again, semi-modular can be great if you don't want to use all the cables, or perhaps you're not sure, you don't want them at the moment, and you might want to add them later. You get the option, you can add cables to it. Now you can also get a completely modular power supply. They usually tend to be a little bit more expensive. And you may ask, what's the benefit in having a completely modular power supply, seeing as you definitely need the 24 pin and the 8 pin? Why would you want that to become unplugged? Well, as I said before, there's the option of you might be using that power supply as a extra power supply to go with a power supply that's already in there. But for the most part, most people are doing it so that they can use custom cables. Now Corsair make them, a lot of other companies make them nowadays, extra cables that you can buy that are braided, that are multiple colours, so that you can theme it to match the theme of your rig. Now we're just opening another power supply here. This one's a brand new unit. It's a 600 watt EVGA power supply. EVGA are reasonably new to the market. Came on the scene a year or so ago, making power supplies, but they've been making motherboards, graphics cards and all sorts of things for years and years and years. And so far, all their power supplies that I've used have been absolutely amazing. I haven't had a single one fail. We've got our UK power plug there. Always nice. Chuck that in the box of about 100 of them that I've got, and our screws to put it in our case. This one's not modular at all. You've got all your cables pre-connected, so this is great because the machine that this has got to go in, that I got it for, is going to be using all the cables anyway, so there's not going to be anything left over. Maybe a couple of Molex or SATA connectors that aren't necessary, but for the most part they're all going to be used. So the benefits of having all the cables connected: you're not going to lose any of the cables, you know where they are. A lot of cases nowadays have a multitude of places to hide spare cables, large gaps behind the motherboard tray, even being able to hide cables underneath power supply shrouds and all sorts these days. So again, it swings and roundabouts. I would say if you want to colour match your cables to your rig, then there's no substitute but a completely modular power supply. If you can hide the majority of the cables in a basement or somewhere, then you can go with extension cables, which just plug onto these and go the rest of the journey to where they need to be plugged in. So you can hide these behind the motherboard, you know, behind the motherboard tray or wherever, and have the extension being the only thing you can see. I've done this a number of times. It looks fantastic. I have no problem recommending doing that. So this is a 600 watt unit from EVGA, as I say. It comes with your 24 built in, comes with your 8-pin built in, wherever that is. Where's your 8-pin? There's your 8-pin. So those are your two standard that you get with all of these built in, unless of course you're going with the fully modular. We have two 6-pin PCI Express. This is what they call a daisy chain. Personally, I prefer it when each PCI Express 6 or 8 has a dedicated line all the way back to the power supply, but these are perfectly fine as well, and they've tested these to make sure that it's going to be fine, so you shouldn't have a problem with any of this. Like I say, if you stick with a reputable brand, you can't really go wrong. But that is where the problem comes, where all the reputable brands, their power supplies are going to start at around £40 to £50, going all the way up to several £100 depending on the unit. Now, it doesn't help me when you have, and I'm not going to mention any names and manufacturers, but you have computer shops selling power supplies that are subpar. They're just really not very good power supplies, and they're selling them for £15 or £20. I've even seen 1000 watt power supplies being sold for £25. Now obviously you're not going to get a decent 1000 watt power supply for £25. £125 you might get a half decent 1000 watt power supply, but you're not going to get one for £25. And it really bugs me, because when I tell people that their power supply costs them £125, sometimes they think, well, why is it £125 when I've seen one for, you know, £100 less? And then I have to go all through this explaining it to them, and they understand in the end. But you know, I don't like people thinking that I'm trying to rip them off or charge them more. You know, obviously a power supply isn't something that you're going to get more frames per second in your game because you've got a better power supply. It's just going to protect your equipment. The last thing you want when you spend over £1,000 on a gaming PC, or any PC for that matter, is for a power surge to happen and it to take out your processor. Now, I've had issues where there's been power surges, and time again, decent quality power supplies will save your stuff. It will protect your equipment from those sort of disasters. So whatever you do, do not cheap out on your power supply when you're configuring your system. It's easy to leave it out and leave it to the last thing, but do not cheap out on it. And remember, your power supply can be used not just on the build that you're doing now, but you could use it on the next build and even the build after that. I've had power supplies that I've been using for years and years and years. 5, 6 years, same power supply, and I've changed out the motherboard, I've changed out the CPU, the graphics card multiple times, and along that whole time, a decent power supply has just been solid and never let me down. So I just thought I'd go through that because I've had some questions lately and I just wanted to address it in a video. Anyway guys, I know this one's been a bit long-winded, but I can't stress enough. Do not cheap out on your power supply. It is not worth it. It's the thing that's going to protect the rest of your system from having a catastrophic failure that's going to mean you're going to be spending a fortune to replace one of your components. I know it's not one of the most sexiest parts of your computer build, but it is one of the most important. It's the thing that powers the rest of all of your system. You're not going to be getting any frames per second if you can't turn it on. So guys, thanks for staying with me, and I'll see you in the next video. Choosing a power supply can be challenging. Cut. Power supplies. Power supplies. Power supplies. Power supplies. You can't speak. We edit it out. Power supplies. Power supplies. Who supplies the power but your power supplies? Power supplies.